Imagine this. You're at your home, when suddenly there's a thunderous knock on your door. Men in police uniforms yell for you to come out. The neighbors peek through their curtains, convinced you're about to be arrested. But what they don't know is this: those aren't real cops. And the quiet man inside isn't who they think he is. He's the most feared FBI agent in the country, and Toady the Hunters just became the hunted. It was late morning when the sudden pounding on the front door shattered the calm of the neighborhood. Police. "Open up immediately," a deep commanding voice barked from outside. The noise drew instant attention. Neighbors paused mid-conversation on their lawns. A delivery truck slowed at the curb. Curtains shifted as people peeked from their windows, eager to see what was happening under the bright daylight sun. Inside the modest two-story home, Marcus Johnson sat calmly at his dining table. A warm cup of tea steamed beside him, and in his hands was a thick file full of neatly organized papers. His eyes moved steadily across the page, completely unfazed by the commotion just a few feet away. He didn't flinch. He didn't rush to the door. Instead, he paused, set his teacup down with deliberate care, and exhaled as if he had been expecting this moment all along. Marcus was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s. His quiet demeanor often led people to underestimate him. To his neighbors, he was just that polite, soft-spoken man who lived alone, paid his rent on time, and never caused trouble. He didn't throw parties, he didn't make noise, and he rarely invited anyone over. He blended in so well that most people never gave him a second thought. But what his neighbors, and even those men outside his door, didn't know was that Marcus Johnson was far from ordinary. He was one of the most feared undercover FBI agents in the country, a living legend within the Bureau. Marcus had spent over a decade infiltrating dangerous organizations, drug cartels, arms traffickers, and international crime syndicates. He had walked into meetings with men who would kill without blinking, played his part flawlessly, and walked out with information that brought entire empires crashing down. Criminals whispered his name like a ghost story, an agent who could vanish into the crowd only to reappear when it was already too late for his enemies. And today, someone had made a grave mistake. They had sent imposters, fake police officers, to his door, thinking they could scare, arrest, or perhaps even eliminate him. Marcus walked toward the door with slow, steady steps. His ears caught every detail: the shuffle of boots on his porch, the strained authority in the voices, and the telltale impatience of men pretending to hold power. He already knew they weren't real police. Their timing was sloppy. Real officers would have arrived with marked cars, flashing lights, and a clear warrant in hand. Real officers would announce not only police but also their division and their reason for being there. And real officers didn't sound that nervous. Marcus's lips curled into the faintest smirk. They thought they were the hunters. But in reality, they had walked straight into the lion's den. He reached for the doorknob, not with fear but with calculated calm. On the other side stood men who believed they were about to snatch an ordinary civilian. Instead, they were about to meet Special Agent Marcus Johnson, the ghost of the FBI. And under the blazing daylight, he was ready. Marcus slowly opened the door, his expression calm and unreadable. Standing before him were three men clad in dark blue uniforms. At first glance, they might have looked official to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But Marcus's sharp eyes caught the flaws immediately. Their badges gleamed a little too brightly, like cheap props from a costume shop. Their belts sagged awkwardly with gear that didn't match regulation standards. And their posture, rigid yet sloppy, was a dead giveaway. One of them, the tallest of the group, barked harshly, "Marcus Johnson, you're under arrest. Step outside with your hands up." Marcus tilted his head, feigning confusion. His voice was calm, almost amused, as he asked, "What's the charge?" "Don't play games," the tall one snapped back, his impatience showing. "You're coming with us now!" By this time, the quiet suburban street was alive with curiosity. Under the glaring afternoon sun, neighbors stepped out onto their porches and sidewalks, shielding their eyes as they watched the scene unfold. Some abandoned their gardening tools. Others paused their dog walks. Phones were raised, red recording lights blinking, eager to capture the drama in broad daylight. To them, it looked like their polite neighbor was about to be dragged away by the police. Some whispered that they had always suspected something unusual about Marcus. Others shook their heads in disappointment, convinced they were witnessing the fall of a man hiding a dark secret. But Marcus saw a very different picture. In mere seconds, he had catalogued every mistake the men had made. The way one of them gripped his weapon like he'd never received proper training. The cheap off-color patches stitched onto their uniforms. And the faint tremor in their voices that revealed more fear than authority. They weren't police officers. They were imposters. Criminals in stolen uniforms, sent on a mission to capture him. Instead of panic, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. A small smirk tugged at his lips. "Sure," he said casually, stepping forward as though surrendering. "Take me in." The imposters exchanged quick glances, surprised at how easily he complied. One grabbed his arm roughly, shoving him toward the curb where a dark, unmarked van sat parked under the blazing sun. Another moved behind him, pushing harder as if eager to finish the job quickly before too many eyes noticed. But the moment one of them tried to force him into the van, Marcus's entire demeanor shifted. In the blink of an eye, he exploded into motion. His body moved like a coiled spring finally released. A sharp elbow smashed into the ribs of the man behind him, knocking the air out of his lungs. Marcus spun, his hand snapping up to disarm the second man in one fluid motion. Before the imposter even realized what had happened, his gun clattered onto the sunlit pavement. The third man barely had time to raise his hands before Marcus drove him against the brick wall of the house with controlled but brutal force. In less than 3 seconds, the quiet man they thought was their target had turned the entire situation upside down. The imposters were left gasping for breath, their weapons gone, their bodies pinned and helpless. Across the street, neighbors froze in disbelief. The man they thought was being arrested had, with impossible speed and precision, dismantled 3 armed men as if they were untrained amateurs. Phones kept recording, but now the tone had changed. What people were capturing wasn't the fall of a criminal. It was the revelation of someone far more dangerous, far more skilled than anyone had imagined. Marcus stood tall in the golden light of day, his calm composure returning as he surveyed the 3 subdued attackers. For the first time, his neighbors realized Marcus Johnson wasn't the victim here. He was the storm they should never have underestimated. Marcus tied the men's wrists tightly with zip ties, tools he always carried in his pocket. To most people, it would have seemed unusual, maybe even paranoid, to walk around prepared like that. But for Marcus, it was second nature. He had lived through too many situations where one small detail determined whether he walked away alive. And today was one of those days. The 3 men groaned and cursed as Marcus forced them down onto the sunlit pavement, their cheap uniforms now wrinkled and dusty. Sweat trickled down their temples in the late afternoon heat. Marcus crouched in front of them, his dark eyes unflinching. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. His presence alone was enough to make most men uneasy. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Silence. The imposters avoided his gaze, their jaws clenched tight. They were hoping to stay strong, to keep their secret buried. To them, Marcus still looked like just one man, alone, vulnerable, someone they might be able to outlast. But Marcus wasn't just anyone. He had spent years interrogating men who thought they could hide the truth. Drug lords, contract killers, traffickers, men who would rather bite their tongues than give up information. And yet Marcus had a way of cutting through their armor. He didn't need fists. He didn't need violence. He used something far sharper, his words. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a razor-thin whisper. "You've already failed. You showed up in cheap costumes, you didn't cover your tracks, and you picked the wrong house. The only way you walk away from this street alive is if you tell me who sent you." The words hit harder than any punch. One man spat on the ground in defiance. Another turned his face away, lips pressed tight. But the third, shorter, younger, less hardened than the rest, was trembling under the midday sun. Marcus's gaze locked on him like a spotlight. "You," Marcus said, pointing with a steady finger. "You're not a killer. You're not built for this life. Whoever sent you doesn't care if you live or die. You were disposable the moment you put on that uniform." The younger man's breathing quickened. He tried to hold his composure, but Marcus's words cut straight through him, stripping away the bravado. Finally, he broke. His voice cracked as he stammered, They told us to bring you in. Said you were dangerous. Said you needed to disappear." The other 2 cursed under their breath, furious at their partner's weakness. But it was too late. The damage was done. Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He didn't need the man to say any more. He already had a strong suspicion who was behind this. Weeks earlier, Marcus had infiltrated one of the largest criminal organizations in the state. On the surface, they ran legitimate businesses, construction firms, shipping companies, and bustling nightclubs. But Marcus had uncovered the truth. Behind the polished fronts was a vast web of corruption, money laundering, and weapons trafficking that stretched into politics, law enforcement, and international markets. He had gotten close. Too close. Close enough that his cover had finally cracked, and now, under the clear daylight sky, the organization had shown its hand. The fake police hadn't come to arrest him. They weren't there to intimidate him. They had come to kidnap him, or worse, to kill him quietly and make his body disappear without a trace. Marcus stood up slowly, his shadow stretching long across the pavement. His expression was unreadable, but inside, his mind shifted gears from defense to offense. If his enemies wanted him gone, then it meant only one thing. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather case. With one hand, he flipped it open and held it in front of the men. Sunlight caught the gold emblem inside, making it gleam in the open air. "Let me introduce myself properly," Marcus said, his voice sharp and deliberate. "Special Agent Marcus Johnson, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words hit harder than a gunshot. The three imposters froze. Their eyes widened as they stared at the badge. Disbelief etched across their faces. The color drained from their skin. They had just attempted to kidnap not only a federal agent, but the agent whose very name sent chills through the criminal underworld. Marcus Johnson wasn't just another man with a badge. In whispered circles of crime, he was known only by a nickname, the Ghost. He was the agent who could blend into any environment, dismantle entire empires piece by piece, and vanish without a trace until it was too late. Once the Ghost marked a target, that target always fell, and today, under the bright glare of the afternoon sun, these imposters had stumbled into his path. "You picked the wrong house," Marcus added coldly. His tone wasn't raised, but the menace in it was enough to make the youngest imposter tremble uncontrollably. Then came the sound that sealed their fate. Sirens. Unlike their cheap uniforms and fake authority, this sound was unmistakably real. High-pitched wails echoed down the street, growing louder by the second. Blue and red lights splashed against the neighborhood's houses as squad cars tore into the cul-de-sac. Marcus allowed himself the faintest smirk. He had triggered the silent alarm on his phone before he'd even opened the door. The moment they announced themselves, their downfall was inevitable. Within moments, the quiet suburban street transformed into a scene of chaos. Squad cars screeched to a halt and real officers swarmed the yard, weapons drawn and commands shouted. The imposters, still zip-tied and trembling, were dragged off the ground and shoved against the hoods of police cruisers, their cheap disguises now worthless. Neighbors, who had been peeking nervously from porches and driveways in the clear daylight, gasped as the truth unfolded. What they thought was the arrest of their quiet neighbor had flipped into something straight out of a movie. Their phones, already recording, now captured something no one had ever imagined. Marcus Johnson revealing himself as a top FBI agent, calmly dismantling 3 armed attackers and exposing them for what they truly were. Gasps and shouts rippled up and down the street. Some whispered in awe, others called out in disbelief. Children clung to their parents, asking how their soft-spoken neighbor could be an FBI agent. But the most striking reaction was silence, the heavy silence of those who realized they had completely underestimated Marcus all these years. By evening, the videos had gone viral. Clips flooded every platform, showing Marcus's calm, fearless composure as he disarmed and subdued 3 imposters before revealing his badge. Headlines screamed across the internet. Quiet neighbor exposed as FBI agent after foiling broad daylight kidnapping attempt. Millions praised him. Some called him a hero. Others called him a legend, but Marcus didn't care for the fame. To him, it was just another day in the line of duty. Another reminder that danger could come knocking at any moment. And when it did, the Ghost was always ready. Later that afternoon, the street was quiet again. The flashing lights had faded. The squad cars had pulled away and curious neighbors had retreated back into their homes. The hum of the day returned, birds in the trees, a lawnmower buzzing faintly in the distance, and children's voices echoing from a few houses down. Inside, Marcus sat in his living room, cradling the same cup of tea he had left untouched earlier. The steam was long gone, the liquid lukewarm, but he didn't mind. His phone buzzed on the table. Glancing down, he saw the name of his FBI director glowing on the screen. Marcus answered, listening as the man on the other end offered praise and congratulations, his voice brimming with admiration. "Johnson, you handled that flawlessly. The whole bureau's talking about it. You've done more today than most agents do in a lifetime." Marcus listened quietly, his expression calm, betraying little emotion. When the call ended, he set the phone aside and leaned back in his chair. Praise wasn't what he sought. Not from the bureau, not from the millions of strangers online now replaying clips of what had happened. Recognition had never been his goal. For Marcus, it was just another day in the dangerous life he had chosen long ago. Still, he knew what the arrests meant. The three imposters, terrified of the consequences of crossing an FBI agent, had given up names, locations, and contacts. That one reckless attempt to take him down had ripped a hole in the cartel's carefully constructed walls of secrecy. For years they had operated in the shadows, laundering money through construction firms, hiding weapons in shipping containers, moving cash through offshore accounts. But now they had exposed themselves, and Marcus wasted no time exploiting it. In the weeks that followed, he and his team moved like predators through the cartel's empire. Warehouses were raided, accounts were frozen, trusted lieutenants, once untouchable, were dragged into custody in broad daylight. One by one, the dominoes fell, until the organization that had seemed untouchable was reduced to rubble. In the end, Marcus knew countless lives had been saved, people who would never even know his name, people who would go on living their lives freely because he had chosen to risk his. And yet, despite the headlines splashed across newspapers, cartel collapses after FBI sting, Agent Johnson strikes again, Marcus returned quietly to his neighborhood life. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't bask in the spotlight. When neighbors waved from their driveways, he simply waved back. When someone cautiously mentioned the viral video, he smiled politely and changed the subject. To the outside world, he was just Marcus, the reserved man who lived alone, sipped tea during the day and minded his own business. That was how he preferred it. But in the darker corners of the underworld, the story spread like wildfire. Whispers of the failed kidnapping attempt, tales of how three armed men had been disarmed in seconds, stories of the badge revealed, the cold stare, the calm voice that promised no escape. Criminals knew his name, but they never spoke it aloud. To them, he was the ghost, the man who appeared when you least expected, the man whose pursuit always ended the same way. Because once Special Agent Marcus Johnson came after you, your fate was already sealed. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and inspiring stories. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.